did. And you're such a good resource for people that are going through that experience themselves, because it's something that I think, I mean, I talk a lot about like the winding road to witchcraft and like the weird kid to adult witch pipeline, but there is
Yeah.
also a lot of people who come to this path later on. And it's
Mhm.
not about because it's woo, it's not because they didn't really get exposed to it. It's because they actually grew up hearing that it's like fundamentally wrong and like a terrible thing to do,
Yeah.
which anybody that knows anything about like spirituality or witchcraft at all thinks is genuinely hilarious, because it's like the most opposite from anything that this like fear mongering kind of perspective would tell you. Like your average witch is like so wonderful, so like concerned with, you know, healing the world, being like, you know, frolicking outside. Like it's not this like crazy thing like they kind of paint it out to be. um and so it's really good to have, I think, a resource for people that has gone through uh that same line of inquiry themselves, of going, oh
Yeah.
my goodness. So I have to ask you then, Hannah, what was it always since you were a kid that you were like kind of attracted or like pulled to witchcraft, and maybe you weren't allowed, or was this something that kind of happened? Because you were saying there was like a twist of fate involved. And I don't know if you just mean the fact that you
Mm.
guys ended up being, you know, I guess kicked out. Is
Yeah.
that what happened? The you were kicked.
Excommunicated.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually went to Pentecostal Bible camp as a child for and my mom wasn't even. It was just that I chose to do it, and it was wild experience. Wild. Pentecostals a range.
Yes.
Not everybody,
Why?
I think, really understands. You know, there's different iterations of it, and there are various levels of
Yeah.
wild,
Crazy.
but
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah. I
My
was trying to say something nice, but I couldn't.
my husband was raised Catholic. So
Okay.
when we first started like dating and like, oh, you were Christian, yeah, you are too. Like that's kind of where we're at, or like raised. But then I would say stuff and he would just stop and turn and be like, what? What did you say? I'm like, oh, like when you speak in tongues. And he's like, am I allowed to swear on yours?
Oh, hello.
Good. I figured, but I just wanted to check. Anyway, so yeah, he's like, what the fuck are you talking about? And I was like, well, like tongues is this, or like, I'd start saying things that were part of my just normal experience, even though I'd been out of the church for a while at this point. I hadn't
Yeah.
deconstructed yet. And so in me trying to explain what certain things were, I realized how incredibly insane I sounded. And I was like, whoa, this is weird, right? And he's like, that is hella weird. What the hell is that? Where did you go? And I ended up having to take him to my church to be like, see, this is what I grew up in, just to sort of prove it, I guess, in a way. As a child, I wasn't allowed to watch Snow White because it had a witch in it. I wasn't allowed to watch The Smurfs because it had Gargamel, who was doing witchcraft. I wasn't allowed to watch, anything that had any hint of witchcraft in it. So it was this hidden, secret, evil thing that you're not allowed to do, which is the perfect way to make me very interested in whatever the hell that is, right? But at the same time, I had been indoctrinated to believe that it was coming from this place of pure evil. I'd been indoctrinated to believe there was literally demons hiding under my bed waiting to get me at night. So it was this, I want it, but I can't do it. Every time I went to, Blockbuster, I'd be looking at like the back of the craft, like, oh my gosh. But then I'd have to quickly like hide it behind another DVD before my mum came along. Like I was interested, but I could not explore that, right? Like Harry Potter was banned. It was all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
We had no access to a lot of secular stuff. So listening to secular radio was not okay in our church. So there was a real restriction on information. Now, this is one of the things that I teach in my classes and things like that. I currently have a class that is on deconstructing specifically from the rapture doctrine, and I'm working on one that helps people deconstruct specifically from the doctrine of hell, because I found these two phobia-based indoctrination pieces are the ones that hold the most fear and control over people.
Yeah.
So they're the ones I wanted to start with. I went in with the big guns. But when I'm teaching about this, I have to also talk about cult tactics and what they are and how they work. And one of the ones is information control, right? It's a huge one. So controlling what information you're allowed access to and what information, so they feed you the information they want you to have, and then they restrict the information they don't want you to have. And this was one of those things. You're not allowed to listen to secular radio, watch certain TV shows or movies, or read certain books. All of that is about information control, so they can control the narrative of what they want people to do, right? And we can look at that from an outside point as well, as then you can't be taught to think critically. You can't be taught to evaluate these things yourself. And so you are more susceptible then to the information that they are feeding you. And then that goes into a whole host of other things in where this can go wrong in terms of like politics or whatever is happening in the world, and people being more easily swayed to a certain viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point. So as I'm growing up, getting to sort of like teenage life, I have a very vivid memory of opening I think it was a Dolly magazine, which was like a teen girl magazine, and it had a sealed section in the middle, which was always like, oh, what is in there? And I wasn't supposed to open those ever. They were always like, they're sealed for a reason. You're not allowed to look in them. And my curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it, and it was a witchcraft one. And it was all about Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and it had a spell in there. And just reading that made me go into like a spiral of like penance and praying, thinking I had unlocked some terrifying, terrible thing, and obviously invited a demon in. Like, I'm possessed now. Like, this is my life, right? So, but I remember being so intrigued. I had to read it, and then immediately felt all the guilt from that indoctrination. So, like, the interest was there. Mm-hmm. As we got, kicked out of the church and a few years went on, I noticed that I was very much drawn to things like the darker side of things. I sort of really allowed myself to explore those. Like, I wasn't allowed to watch this then. Now I can read Harry Potter, or now I can, do all of these other things and watch these movies, and got very obsessed with things like True Blood, which is all about supernatural stuff, right? So it kind of blew open my worldview.
Yeah.
In a really good way, in a fun way, in a safe way, because it's media, it's fantasy media, right? So I could explore these like in this realm of it's not really real. But I'm one of those hyperfixation type of people. I'm very neurodivergent. So I went deep on all of these things and started looking at, well, where does that come from? What's the mythology behind that? What is the folklore behind that? What's the history behind that? And suddenly started piecing together a few things and going, oh, actually, some of this actually might be real. Oh, that's kind of cool. And that sort of led me down into doing a few little like experiments with pushing my worldview out, usually around things like divination. I wouldn't go near tarot cards for a long time. They were still too evil in my brain. But things like tea leaf reading felt really safe. So I would do tea leaf reading. I would grow my own herbs. I would talk to my plants. And I didn't really classify this sort of stuff as witchcraft at that point. I was very in tune with other people. So I remember at my workplace, someone would be on the phone and I'd just go, oh, that's not a good phone call. I need to go and get her a cup of like chamomile tea, and I'm going to sweeten it, and that's going to, take her mind off it while she's doing this, which is a very witchy thing to do, right? And that was just from her saying hello. It's like I just knew. Yeah. And then suddenly she's got this steaming hot tea and she's like, how did you know? And I'm like, I just know. And so my work colleagues started actually saying, you're so witchy. And I was like, oh, I like that. That's fun. Yeah, I am witchy. Yes. But if someone had said to me, are you a witch? I would have absolutely been repelled by that word. Like, no, I'm not a witch, just a little bit witchy. So I had to have the why there for a long time to make it feel safer. And then I guess the more I delved, the more I explored, the more my divination predictions came true, the more I started to tear things apart by not returning to the church, the more comfortable I became with saying that word. And then when I finally did say, you know what, I am actually a witch, everything shifted. It's like that, taking that power of that word and the fact that, yes, it is directly opposed to the church. And I'm okay with that now. So that's my long story of getting there.
I love it, because that's such, I mean, this is the thing for me. It's funny. The word witch, what is a witch? What is witchcraft? I mean, everybody would have so many different answers for that, but like at a base level, being a witch is about personal power, and it's about not just like laying down and being like, oh, I guess things are happening to me, and like, what am I going to do? It's all about reclaiming that power. And so I love that, because when you look at the fact that having those religious belief systems that are really very oppressive in the sense of like, you know, it's controlled what you're allowed to be exposed to. It's almost like this method of like thought control, right? So I went
Yes.
to school for psychology, and I was really lucky when I went to school that I studied cults and group dynamics, which are two different things, but pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because you can see it all over the place, everywhere. So if
Yes.
there's going to be a belief system that is weighing so heavy on your life, why can't it be something that is, instead of heavy, it's something that's light and freeing and feels like it's an escape hatch, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's why like when you even claim the title, not that you always have to, but it can be such a powerful act of liberation, particularly from a religious, like deconstructing
Mm-hmm.
standpoint.
Yeah, I often say that my witchcraft is a love letter to that version of myself, that child who
Yeah.
was terrified in the face of the enormity of the church and the demons that came with that.
Right.
Like this is for her. That is for little Hannah that
Yeah.
was petrified. And little things. Now you've got the psychology background, so does my husband, which is great because when I would tell him things like, oh, I've got such an active imagination. Every time I fall asleep, I've got like a movie length, movie that I go through, and I'm doing all this. And after a few times of sort of telling him about all my wild ideas and everything, he sort of went, sometimes that's called maladaptive daydreaming. You might want to look into that. And I was like, huh, okay. Turns out that is a trauma response to when so many things that you have no control in life, right? So many things are, I guess, oppressive. Like, you're not allowed to do this. You have to do this. This is the way you have to behave. That the only form of escape is through this like wild imaginative daydreaming, which was very often would make me like very emotional. It was quite, looking back, I'm like, oh my god, I would never want a child to imagine those sorts of things that I was definitely doing when I was at a young age.
Mhm.
I didn't realize that was my coping mechanism. So learning and finding out all of this sort of like psychological aspect to it has been really helpful. With cults, understanding like the bite model, which is where methods of behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control, all of those forms of manipulating people into a specific way of being, that's been crucial for unwriting it, I guess. And then, as I was saying before, making sure it doesn't happen in these spaces as well. So, I have chronic health issues. So I'm always looking for something that's going to help me heal from, I've got EDS, I've got chronic migraines. So I looked into when celery juice got really big. I was like, oh, maybe this is it. Everyone's saying it's really great. And it didn't take me long to start recognizing, oh, this is a cult. Wow. But it's not religious, right? It's not a religious cult, but it is definitely like that new age spiritual sort of cult because the cult leader, I don't know if you want me to say names, but anyways, celery guy, is saying that he's got this spirit that's speaking to him and giving him all of this information. Mm-hmm. And it has led to people passing away by following his advice. Like, it's really, really horrible. And when you're in that space, you can see it a mile away. A lot of MLMs, which are technically businesses, but they're not actually real businesses, a lot of them lean on this cult tactic dynamic to control people and to survive as a quote unquote business. So it's when you see it, you can't unsee it, and you start to see it everywhere. So
yeah,